In this video, we will go back to the year 1830, the day France landed on the shores of Algeria, through to the glorious November Revolution, then independence and the building of the Algerian state, all the way to today's new Algeria. It is the journey of a people who resisted and never surrendered. On June 14, 1830, the French fleets anchored off the coast of Sidi Frej, west of the capital. More than 37,000 soldiers, armed with cannons and horses and led by General de Bourmont, landed in a massive campaign that France had been planning for years. At that time, Algeria was under the rule of Dey Hussein, representing the Ottoman Empire. But Ottoman influence had weakened, and Algeria was experiencing political isolation and military difficulties. After brief battles in Sidi Frej, the French forces advanced toward the capital. On July 5, 1830, after heavy bombardment, Dey Hussein was forced to surrender and sign the document handing over Algiers. With the fall of the capital, France thought Algeria was in its grasp, but what it did not realize was that occupying a city does not mean subjugating an entire people. And so, the first spark of resistance began. After the fall of Algiers in 1830, France thought its mission was over, but what it faced was the beginning of the longest popular resistance in its colonial history. Local uprisings erupted in various regions, but the largest and most organized was led by Emir Abdelkader in western Algeria. Emir Abdelkader was born in Mascara in 1808 into a family of faith and learning. After the French occupation, tribal leaders gathered to choose a commander who would unite the ranks, and the choice fell on the young Abdelkader, known for his courage, piety, and wisdom. In 1832, he was proclaimed Emir of Jihad at the age of 24. As soon as he took command, the Emir began building an organized state with an army, a treasury, and a judicial system, managing to unite the tribes under one banner. He fought several battles against the French, most notably the Battle of Sidi Brahim, which showcased the strength of his organization. At first, the French suffered heavy losses, which forced them to sign the Treaty of Des Michels in 1834, recognizing the emir's control over vast areas of western Algeria. But this treaty did not last long, as France soon violated it and sought to expand its influence. In 1837, the emir signed the Treaty of Tafna with General Bugaud, which granted him authority over nearly two-thirds of the country and gave him the opportunity to organize his state more deeply. During this period, he established an advanced administrative and judicial system, to the extent that some historians consider his state the first nucleus of modern Algeria. But France was never going to accept the existence of a strong state that rivaled it in Algeria. Thus, the conflict was destined to continue. After the Treaty of Tafna in 1837, Emir Abdelkader used the period of peace to strengthen the organization of his state. He built fortresses, established simple weapons workshops, organized the judiciary, and created an administrative system that is still recognized to this day. But France was not satisfied with the situation and was waiting for the chance to reignite the war. In 1839, French forces violated the treaty by crossing the Iron Gates near Constantine, which Abdelkader considered a declaration of war. He then called upon the tribes for jihad once again, and a full-scale conflict broke out, known as the War of Attrition. The emir fought heroic battles, most notably the Battle of Makda in 1839, where he inflicted heavy losses on the French army. He also used hit-and-run tactics and guerrilla warfare that deeply unsettled the enemy. But France responded with unprecedented force. General Bugaud was appointed Governor-General of Algeria and adopted a scorched-earth policy, burning villages, destroying crops, and displacing the population to weaken popular support for the emir. France also brought in thousands of additional soldiers and mobilized enormous resources. Despite Abdelkader's resilience for many years, his strength began to wane before the French military superiority. In 1843, France destroyed the Zamala, the mobile headquarters and treasury of his state, causing him to lose an essential part of his organizational capacity. The battles continued until 1847, when the emir found himself trapped between the Algerian and Moroccan borders after Morocco withdrew its support under French pressure. He then decided to surrender in order to spare Algerian blood, but on the condition that he be exiled to the east. However, France betrayed this promise and imprisoned him in France for years before eventually releasing him, after which he moved to Damascus, where he lived the rest of his life until his death in 1883. In the mountains of Kabylie, uprisings flared time and again. But in 1871, one revolt shook the land more than any other, the revolt of Sheikh el-Mokrani. Mohammed el-Mokrani was a respected leader, rooted in tradition. When France tried to strip him of his power and weaken his influence, he chose defiance. His call to rebellion was answered by thousands. By his side stood Sheikh el-Haddad, the spiritual head of the Rahmaniya order. With a single declaration, he urged hundreds of villages to rise. Soon, tens of thousands of fighters filled the valleys and peaks of Kabylie. The east of Algeria erupted in fire, and their struggle echoed far beyond. At first, the rebels struck hard, achieving swift victories. But France answered with crushing force. Tens of thousands of soldiers, backed by a policy of collective punishment, burning villages, seizing lands, and finding entire communities. The revolt ended with the death of el-Mokrani and the arrest of Sheikh el-Haddad. Yet it remains one of the greatest popular uprisings of the 19th century. Over 250,000 Algerians, nearly a quarter of the population, joined the fight, making it one of the largest anti-colonial revolts in Africa. And resistance did not stop there. In the south, the Ould Sidi Sheikh and Zacha rose up. In the east, the Ouras Mountains fought fiercely. Even in the Sahara, armed movements unsettled the occupiers. These revolts may not have triumphed on the battlefield, but they kept the flame of resistance alive. They carried a timeless message. The Algerian people would never bow, and freedom, whatever the cost, was a destiny to be claimed. At the dawn of the 20th century, resistance in Algeria took on a new form. After the French had crushed the great popular uprisings of the 19th century, the Algerian people turned to another battlefield: politics and intellectual resistance. In this period, Algerians realized that confronting colonial rule was not only through weapons, but also through preserving their identity, religion, and language. A collective consciousness began to grow against France's policy of assimilation, which aimed to erase everything Algerian. One of the most significant movements was the Association of Algerian Muslim Scholars, founded in 1931 under the leadership of Sheikh Abdelhamid bin Badis, alongside prominent figures like Bashir Ibrahimi. They raised their famous motto, Islam is our religion, Arabic is our language, Algeria is our homeland. The association reformed education, established free schools, spread religious and national awareness, and affirmed that Algeria was a distinct nation. At the same time, the nationalist political movement was emerging. The charismatic leader Messali Hadj founded the Algerian People's Party, the first mass political organization to openly demand full independence. His speeches inspired thousands of young Algerians, many of whom would later become the backbone of the independence revolution. Other organizations, such as the North African Star in Paris, linked Algerian migrants to the homeland's cause, spreading political awareness among workers abroad. Then came the outbreak of World War II, 1939 to 1945. Algerians were conscripted into the French army or forced to support the war effort. Many believed their sacrifices would be rewarded, especially after France promised greater rights to colonized peoples once the war was over. After the massacres of May 8, 1945, it became clear to Algerians that independence could not be achieved through demonstrations or political demands. It had to be won through armed struggle. In secret, a group of young nationalists began organizing themselves. They were the sons of the nationalist movement, many of the members of the Special Organization, OS, a clandestine body created in the 1940s to prepare for armed resistance. When the French authorities uncovered and dismantled the OS, the dream did not vanish. It continued to burn in the hearts of the youth. By the early 1950s, a small group known as the Committee of 22 gathered in secrecy to make a historic decision, to launch a nationwide revolution. Among them were names that would later become immortal in Algerian history: Daidush Murad, Mostafa Ben Beled, Larbi Ben Midi, Mohamed Boudiaf. On the night of November 1st, 1954, the spark was lit. Coordinated attacks targeted French barracks, police stations, and military outposts across the mountains and villages. That same day, the Declaration of November 1 SD was issued, clearly stating the objectives of the revolution. Asterisk national independence. Asterisk the restoration of sovereignty. Asterisk the establishment of a democratic and social state within the framework of Islamic principles. For France, the shock was immense. It had long believed that Algeria had been pacified, that resistance was a thing of the past. Instead, it discovered that the flame of defiance had never been extinguished, and that a new generation had taken up arms to continue the struggle of their ancestors. At first, the French dismissed the uprising as nothing more than banditry. But as the days passed, the attacks multiplied, spreading from one region to another, and thousands of villages rallied behind the revolutionaries. This was the beginning of a long war that would last for more than 7 years, one that would reshape the history of Algeria and of the entire region. With the outbreak of the November 1954 revolution, Algeria entered a new chapter in its history. The early days were difficult. The revolutionaries possessed only a handful of weapons, mostly old rifles and hunting guns, facing one of the most powerful armies in the world. But their faith in the cause was an unbreakable weapon. They relied on the mountains and forests as natural strongholds, launching swift surprise attacks that unsettled the French army. Each operation proved that the revolution was not a fleeting revolt, but a true movement for liberation. Among the leaders who emerged in this first stage were Mostafa Ben Belade in the Ouarez Mountains, known for his toughness and military skill. Didouche Murad in the North Constantinois, who fell as a martyr at the young age of 25. Larbi Ben Midi in the West, remembered as a symbol of sacrifice and unshakable belief in the justice of the cause. Krim Belkacem in Kabylia, who organized the fighters with wisdom and determination. France responded with brutal force. Tens of thousands of soldiers were deployed, sweeping through villages and mountains in massive search-and-destroy operations. At the same time, French propaganda tried to discredit the fighters, dismissing them as nothing more than bandits. But the truth was the opposite. With every attempt to crush it, the revolution grew stronger and spread wider. Within just 2 years, operations expanded across most regions of Algeria, and thousands of young men and women joined the struggle. This early stage demonstrated that the revolution was not a limited uprising, but a national war of liberation destined to continue until independence was achieved. And it soon became clear that greater organization was needed, both politically and militarily, to ensure the survival of the struggle. That turning point would come with the Soummam Congress of 1956. As the resistance spread across Algeria, the need for unity and organization became vital. It was in this context that the Soummam Conference took place on August 20th, 1956, a decisive milestone in the Algerian struggle for freedom. Hidden deep in the Soummam Valley of Kabylie, under strict secrecy and surrounded by French troops, the leaders of the revolution gathered. In the heart of the mountains, they laid the foundations of a future Algerian state. The conference produced historic decisions. The creation of the National Council of the Algerian Revolution, a parliament representing the entire nation. The establishment of the Committee of Coordination and Execution, the embryo of a revolutionary government. The reorganization of the National Liberation Army, with defined zones and clear command structures. And above all, the principle that the internal struggle takes precedence over the external, and that political leadership prevails over military command, ensuring unity and discipline. The Soummam Conference was not just a meeting. It was the birth of a vision, the moment when the Algerian Revolution transformed from scattered resistance into the blueprint of an independent nation. After the Soummam Conference, France did not stand idle. It escalated its military operations, deploying hundreds of thousands of heavily armed soldiers, and tightening control over the eastern border with Tunisia and the western frontier with Morocco, determined to cut off all support to the National Liberation Army. But the revolution did not falter. Instead, it grew stronger and more widespread. Operations spread to the major cities, where bombs exploded and assassinations targeted the symbols of occupation. The Battle of Algiers in 1957 became the most striking example, a fierce confrontation between urban guerrillas and the French army, which resorted to brutal repression and systematic torture in an attempt to silence the uprising. Amid this struggle, France struck at the political leadership of the revolution. In October 1956, it committed an unprecedented act of aerial piracy, intercepting a civilian plane carrying 5 of the revolution's most prominent leaders: Ahmed Ben Bella, Mohamed Boudiaf, Hossein Ait Ahmed, Mohamed Kaider, and Mostafa Lacharaf. Their arrest shocked world opinion. Yet, the revolution endured. New leaders emerged, and the struggle pressed on with renewed determination. In September 1958, the Provisional Government of the Algerian Republic was proclaimed. From that moment, the Algerian cause moved beyond the mountains and valleys, onto the international stage, asserting itself as a global battle for freedom that could no longer be ignored. France began to realize that the struggle was no longer military alone, it was also political. Despite all attempts to isolate the revolution, the Provisional Government of the Algerian Republic succeeded in gaining worldwide sympathy from Arab and African nations, from the Eastern Bloc, and eventually, the Algerian cause reached the halls of the United Nations. But France responded with unprecedented military escalation. Under General Charles de Gaulle, the Maurice Line and the Chow Line were built along the eastern and western borders, fortified with mines and electrified fences, in a desperate attempt to choke the revolution and cut it off from external support. Yet, the National Liberation Army fought on. Guerrilla attacks continued, urban operations multiplied, while Algerian diplomacy knocked on doors across the world, gathering support day by day. By the early 1960s, it became clear France could not win this war by force. Mounting pressure, both inside and outside the country, pushed de Gaulle to open negotiations with the leaders of the revolution. A series of secret meetings followed, leading at last to the Evian Accords, signed on March 18, 1962, in which France recognized the Algerian people's right to self-determination. And on July 5, 1962, after 132 years of colonial rule and 7.5 years of armed struggle, the Algerian flag rose high, proclaiming the independence of Algeria. From the moment France landed on the shores of Sidi Frej in 1830 until Independence Day on July 5, 1962, Algeria was the stage of one of the longest and fiercest resistances ever faced by French colonialism. For 132 years, the struggle never ceased. From the resistance of Emir Abdelkader, to the uprisings of the South and Kabylie, to the revolt of El Mokrani, and later the rise of the modern national movement, all were chapters of one unbroken story, the refusal to surrender. Then came November 1954, the beginning of the Great War of Liberation. 7.5 years of sacrifice, in which hundreds of thousands of martyrs fell, and the land was drenched with the blood of heroes. In the end, the people triumphed. The national flag was raised high, and an independent Algeria was born from the womb of suffering. This is the story of a nation that wrote its history with blood and fire, and proved to the world that freedom is never granted. It is seized. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel to get new stories and documentaries every week. Movie Camera, your support keeps us going and helps us bring you the best content.